It's the most daunting task to start a session right after lunch. So I just hope that I'll be able to get your attention and keep the attention going through the session and perhaps not put you to sleep for Suruchi's or Rohit's sessions. So I think as far as this afternoon is concerned, I am very, very grateful to OGTC to invite me to address a very, very learned gathering. From my experience yesterday, I figured out that being on the other side of the podium doesn't mean that there's something very smart and very different that I'm going to be talking about. It's a learning experience either ways, and since this is a workshop, I would be very happy if we could all participate. And in certain places, I would want your suggestions and ideas, and that's how we'll also keep ourselves awake. So going to where I come from a company called Smart Head Strategy Solution Private Limited. We do a lot of consulting in the Indian corporate sector. We also work for a lot of companies who are wanting to set up shop in India and wanting to expand businesses in India. And our experience has been lately helping a few international brands on their entry strategy, helping them out understand what kind of markets they're addressing, what kind of strategies they should have. So it's a little relevant, for me to be here, and the takeaways are very interesting on either side. We specialize in strategy and operations management, people management, basically all facets of running a business, whether it's finance, people, IT, process mapping, even legal, wherever there are legal requirements that companies have. We've consulted in many areas across the length and breadth of the Indian industry, some of which, I've listed out up there: textile, engineering, software, telecom, medical care, chemicals, education, environment, and jewelry. So what it does is it brings to our table as consultants a very rich and varied experience. And we've always tried to see what we can bring from the other sectors into, some different sectors, so that, we have a new and relevant but very different policies, which differentiate companies from being just yet another similar looking organization. So before we go into the session, which is called HR Perspectives and Policies, I would just like to take a very quick audience poll on what do they understand by HR policies. I'll just maybe make notes here, and that's because I would like to refer all of these points through the presentation. So the house is open. Can anybody start and give me what is their understanding of what HR policies are? Young blood? The lunch was certainly heavy. Koi to boliye? Kuch bataiye. I mean, any understanding, what do you think is an HR policy? Yes, please.
Okay, some procedures which are bind the organization, all the employees, everybody in the organization, to follow certain procedures, which is for the betterment of a day-to-day life in an organization.
Yeah, that's very relevant.
Which is helpful to each and every employee of the company. And can help.
Helpful in ways such as?
What we make the policies, which should be followed up, and for the betterment of the employees, you can say.
Okay.
See, it's like a black and white sheet. HR defines policies for all the employees to follow, like a leave, like attendance, like some benefits.
Like removing all the ambiguities.
Okay, that's excellent.
Making policies is very much easy, but to make them follow, it is.
Yeah, that's step one, which we'll go to. Any other inputs? Somebody from this side?
It helps them to understand about the organization.
Okay.
Understanding of organization.
Any different inputs? Yes, please.
Code of conduct that employees will follow and the company will follow towards them.
Okay.
To work in a systematic manner and
Okay.
do the as per policy decided by the
So it defines systems processes within the boundaries of a policy.
Unfortunately, in India's context, it is only restricted to only recruitment and to some extent training
Okay.
or giving some the wage compensation, etc.
So you think that it's by and large restricted to wage and some recruitment related areas. Okay.
Or other, it should have.
Training, teaching, not competitive. Training, teaching.
Training is
Right, right.
one aspect, another is well-being, how the day-to-day life, right from his well-being as well as his family. That should be taken into account. So once employees are happy, so employer will also be happy.
Okay.
And industry will prosper.
Yes, good thoughts. Very
Employee
good thought.
forum brings
Okay, so would you say communication, internal? So,
solutions, empathy, there are different problems in different companies at different times.
okay. So that's some amount of problem solving that it should help with.
Human touch.
Okay. I think I'll have to put a stop over here because I'm practically running out of my presentation. This is exactly what we were coming to. However, I've structured it a little different, but I think, in the house, we've got a fair understanding of what it means. And I think, by and large, this is what's being talked about by people in this room, that it links the company's vision, goals, plans, deliveries with day-to-day operations. It's a written communication of expectation of the employers and employees from each other. So it sets forth very clearly what an employee is expected to do, perform when he is within the organization, and same goes for the employer. What are his, so it's like rights and duties really, so you should know both. You should know your rights, you should know your duties, and as employers, I think, and employees, this document maybe clarifies that to some degree. It also creates boundaries of acceptable behavior and expectation, which is like somebody said, code of conduct, discipline, leave, transfer, mobility, use of company assets, so on and so forth. And it's also meant to reduce managers' tasks of constant management and intervention. So if you've got some very simple things defined, you would not have people coming day in and day out asking you the but obvious things, working hours, leave, or what happens when somebody falls ill, and what's the medical policy or the accident policy, and so on and so forth. So it sort of helps the manager focus on what he's expected to do in his core area of work. Whereas it also removes all the ambiguity, somebody said very clearly, in how and what to do when somebody comes with a problem. So there's a clear reference here. The document says that, okay, if this happens, then you follow this, and these are the options. So it strengthens the hands of the managers. And in large organizations, particularly in the textile and garment space, we've seen that it's a very, very human-intensive industry. So if we were to have every setup has a few thousand people that I've visited to mostly, whether it's big or small, or a few hundred people. So if we were to really look at clearing up the clutter of confusion, then these policies help doing that. It also is made to recognize the employee need. Why do we create policies like a medical policy or a safety policy or something which is, defining even the code of conduct? Because there is a need that employees also have. There's a need to go home on time. There's a need to have days off. There's a need to have some medical fallback, particularly in a country where the medical health schemes are, or the medical help is very poor. Ultimately, it's a safeguard on either side. It protects you from the unstated, the unwritten and ambiguous situations. So either which ways, it clears the expectations and it sets forth the tone of what is expected out of both the sides. So this is what is stated as per norms. If you go through HR websites, books, and journals and periodicals, most of the people will talk about, or most what is written about is this. Very rarely do we hear the policy, the need of a policy for these reasons: employer branding, attracting talent, retaining talent, workplace improvement, empowering operational managers, identifying and incentivizing talent, and creating ground for innovation. So, would anybody here have in their organizations implemented policies which have helped employer branding? It is creating an awareness about the employer, the organization that you're working for, and it's a positive connotation, which means that it helps.
Google, everybody would like to work for them because they say that they are very encouraging policies.
I think employer branding will be if you're making payments on time, you're doing the right thing, doing the right aspect.
Absolutely. I think so. We are headed in the right direction.
Cases or anything, so it's sort of a branding only.
For employee.
For employer.
No, this is
Employer branding. So,
employee or
employer. So if you have all the right.
Employer branding means, I just want to interrupt.
Is it the vision of the
कि
employer?
बिना कहे कोई भी उस एम्प्लॉयर के लिए काम करने के लिए तैयार हो जाए.
yes, for employee.
Exactly. So it creates.
ऐसा बढ़िया एम्प्लॉयर होना चाहिए कि everybody wants कि मेरे को तो info system में भी काम करना है या TIT में भी काम करना है.
जी.
तो हर एक एम्प्लॉयर को अपना होना चाहिए कि
It's a vision actually which an employer gives.
It's a brand.
We have all posted in most of our factories here. This is the employer's vision that every employee who comes in, he goes through it, and that is what he is owes to his company. And in the same respect, he asks the employee also to give his best.
Okay. Yes, and in some ways, a vision, if it is very well stated and very well understood by the employees, would create good employer branding. But in reference to HR policies or general policies, employer branding would be dependent on the feel-good factor of being in that organization. There's employee satisfaction, and that has many aspects and many facets. So every employee becomes your brand ambassador. When your employee steps out, he says, "Ye company mein kaam karna hai, isme bade maze aaye kaam karne pe." There are many things that he talk about positively. So somebody else will also get influenced, saying that this is something that's really good. Like Sir said, Infosys or Google or many other organizations have become dream companies for youngsters and for others to go work for. And why does it happen? Because it's not what's written in the newspaper. Because very often there's a lot of things written in the newspapers, but it is the first-hand experience of people. When they take it to somebody they know, it's the good word of mouth, and that is how brands are built. I mean, I'm sorry to take reference, but in comparison of two large brands, there's a Tata's and there's a Reliance. Now, if I were to give today somebody a choice, everything else being equal, where would you choose? I am certain most of them would choose the Tatas to work with. That's employer branding. Not that there's something seriously, not right with Reliance, but it's just that something's been created which is fuzzy, which is, a nice and warm feeling about being employed with Tatas. That possibly is not the same feeling with Reliance. If there's anybody from Reliance, I apologize for, taking that as an example. But the truth is on the ground.
Reena, I just want to give an example. I was in a conference in Switzerland and I was the next guy sitting to me. He showed me, we exchanged cards. He said, oh, you are from India? Oh, I worked in Tata company for 3 years. So, this kind of like sitting over there and he said, I worked in Tata company. So that's a extreme case of employer branding.
Absolutely. And I'm reminded this also is true for Infosys. When Infosys was looking for people to work in certain difficult territories in Africa, there were a lot of Indians who were not very keen to apply for those positions. But since they had put it on their website as an open position, there were a lot of applications which came from the US. Because people had heard about it, and I think they are a little more open in their approach and more adventurous, and for them Africa was not like the dark continent as it is to most of us, who have not visited Africa. So that's the employer branding that Infosys had created for itself. And I think subsequent to employer branding follows, attracting talent and retaining talent. I am, we've done a lot of studies where we figured out that, and a lot of companies call us to do studies on retention and, how to not have high attrition numbers, what do we do, and so on and so forth. A lot of them looking for, 10-minute solutions or easy to implement things. But what's worked very well for successful companies is, this very thing. The kind of work environment, the kind of policies, the kind of procedures, the kind of trust and belief that people put in the system and the clarity that they have, which has made them stay. In some of the large organizations, I'm bound by confidentiality not to mention them, there is a very clear trend that we've seen that people have not left that organization unless it was for something which was very, very path-breaking, maybe like a 70% salary increase, or an assignment where, they were actually getting blocked in the current company because of a senior, and they thought that the next growth was maybe a decade down the line. So unless it was these very difficult situations within the organization or very attractive or outside the organization, they were not willing to leave for 15, 20, even 25% raise in salaries. Not willing to leave if they knew that there is a growth path, but it might take time, like 2 to 3 years. So that is exactly what retention is impacting retention in these organizations. Would anybody be able to tell me how HR policies are going to create workplace improvements? Any thoughts on this?
Speak out, please.
Yes, please. I think there's... Give a minute to you to mull over it. But I think there are a lot of wise people sitting in this room. Yes?
I'd like to add here, workplace improvement could be, how many facilities you give to employees. If it is a employee-centric organization, an organization which takes care of employees because they are working for them day in and day out. Basic things like washrooms, clean drinking water, things like that, For our industry, I'm specifically mentioning, medical facilities, crèche in case of nursing mothers and all, and for children. These are things which make a workplace, a better place to work.
I think there's some very good ideas which came out of what she was saying. Was she audible to all of you? Okay, that's great. And I think, what she's mentioned is what a lot of organizations are moving towards because talent is scarce. Yesterday in one of the sessions, we were talking about, getting skilled people, getting trained people. So once you have your talent base, which you've trained for maybe some months or some years, you wouldn't want to lose them. Wouldn't want to lose them for the fact that, you don't have a creche to support little children of your women employees, or wouldn't have systems in place to support somebody undertaking some education, or wouldn't have a system or policy to support maybe somebody falling ill on premises, or having met with an accident on premises. So these are things which definitely impact workplace improvement. In very, very wizened organizations, there is, they have created small groups or sizable groups also maybe, depending on the size of the organization, who ideate on how to improve maybe the working of a certain process, maybe creating efficiencies. And there are HR policies which have clearly elucidated that if this impacts to X number of hours of saved in working, or rupee impact, or maybe, employee satisfaction impact, there are reward schemes attached to it. So people are constantly working towards, if there's a reward attached to it, there is always a recognition attached to it. And if you look at, I'm from HR, so there is this hierarchy of needs, and recognition is one of the highest hierarchy, second highest on the hierarchy of needs. People, after they've done everything, they've put their house and home and hearth together, are earning enough, look at, creating value. What else can I do? And through that, get some recognition. So, in fact, in a lot of organizations, this has percolated so well that line managers are very sort of hands-off, and they say that if we want to do process improvements, we just push the whole initiative down to our supervisors, to our operators, even down to people who are shop floor level technicians. And surprisingly, they come up with much better suggestions than a line manager for that particular function, because they're close to the ground. They know what's happening. They know where the wastage is. There was an instance, there's a colleague of mine. He used to work for an organization, and the first day, his chauffeur, he was driving him to the office, and this is the company chauffeur, company driver. He started talking about the company and about this gentleman's predecessor. This gentleman had joined that organization as a managing director. And I'm going to say this in Hindi because those were his words. He said, after inquiring a little bit about the new managing director, he said, "Saab, purane wale jo sahab the," which means, not the predecessor, but the person earlier to the predecessor. तो उनका काम करने का स्टाइल एकदम फर्क था. तो उन्होंने कहा, कैसे फर्क था? कहते हैं, साहब, आज तक उन्होंने कंपनी का 50 पैसे का भी फायदा नहीं उठाया है. So, that is the kind of information that percolates down, right down to a person who is driving this individual. What I'm intending to say is that we should not ignore the fact that there are a lot of people working. There might be thousands working on your shop floor or hundreds working on your shop floor. But everything is evident to everybody. So you can also expect the same ideas to percolate down upwards. So for this gentleman, he said that it was such an eye-opener, which means that though he was joining at the very senior level, it made him feel very good that what is the level of commitment, responsibility, and ethical awareness that is in the system. And I think such good ideas also set the trend for others to follow. So, if that's the work culture that you create, you've already created a lovely benchmark. Second point was empowering operational managers. I think in the previous slide we discussed a bit of it. One is creating the rules, and second is helping somebody implement it. I think किसी ने कहा था ना कि implement नहीं होते हैं, आपने कहा था. So that was truly very nicely said. अगर आप हमारा Indian Penal Code देखें या Indian legal system देखें, I think we have the legal system which possibly defines and describes and has sections and subsections to such a detail that you just can't go wrong if you follow that. There's everything detailed out. It's one of the most comprehensive legal systems in the whole world. But जब भी legal की बात आती है या implementation की बात आती है, and look at even fast courts, they're taking 9 months, and that's a fast track court, and we all are making fun of it. So it's not what you write down, and it's not what you create as a book. I think what is important is empowering the people by telling them that they are going to be the ones who are going to be, the ownership is with them. They're going to own this document. It is not something that, I create and it percolates down from the top and say that, this is, and dump it on somebody's desk. Ye hai manual. आप नए आए हो, अच्छा ये लो, follow करो, पढ़ो. And I've seen HR manuals, policy manuals, which run into 600 pages. And, and you're expected, on the day you join to have gone through those. And normally what happens is, irrespective of how interested you are, you might just go through the first 10, 20, 40 pages. उसके बाद मालूम चला कि आपका line manager आ गया and he says, okay, let's sit down with your KRAs or let's sit down with, I'll take you around on the shop floor. And the next day you're up and running. So you never get time to even look at that. Unless you're trapped somewhere and you say, hey, let me just refer. So it's very important that if you've created something, you have to have people understand what you've created. And that will empower your managers. They are the ones who will take this whole thing to their teams and the teams will understand. The expectations will be set right. HR policies, I think somebody here said about, I think sir, you said, reward, incentivize, and identify how people can actually create a positive environment. I think this is missing. How many of you here are from non-textile backgrounds? Let's say it has at some point worked for non-textile stroke garment industry. 1, 2, 3. Very few. What I was, wanting to understand from people who are, anyways, it's a room full of people from the textile and garment industry. How many of you have incentive policies at whichever level in your organizations? 1 and 2 and 3, 4. This is exactly the story in the textile space across the country. We've worked with them, and very often when we've spoken and asked them this question, why isn't there an incentive policy? The answer is, that's the industry term. There's no company which has textile mein to ji aisa nahi hota hai. We don't have incentive policies in this space. And when we ask them why, there are no answers. It's like, nahi hota hai ji, humne start nahi kiya hai and we haven't, and it's working very well, so we've not had it in place. So when we talk about incentivizing, it is not about telling people that we're going to give you money because if you do this, this is what you're going to get. It's just to focus their efforts. I think giving small incentives or rewards or putting a certain portion of their compensation into incentive is not why a person wakes up in the morning, combs his hair, wears his shirt, comes to office, spends 12 hours, 10 hours, and then goes back home. I think each one, if we believe, has an intent to come and perform for himself. Then, these incentive policies only help the individual get focused. Because you come into office and you say that I'm a sales guy. But, there are like 7, 8 other things that I get involved in. And I know that, like 40% of my day has gone doing something extra, whereas I should be focusing on getting the numbers. And an incentive policy identifies this number. That, this month, we'll be happy if you do X dollars of business or X rupees of business. So it's just keeping the focus. You might not want to even, and sometimes what happens is that people then begin to separate relevant work, important work, necessary and urgent. So that once they know how to do it, I think organizations will have very little effort into, shepherding them and taking them to task for not having done something, because they are very clear. And in an industry which has, 12, 20 million, I'm not very sure. Prashant, what is the figure?
Overall, Indian industry.
The textile and garment industry. No, not employment. 35 is what direct employments. So 35 million people of this country, next only to agriculture. I think it is very important for you to have everybody's focus. You need to be in the magnetic north. And these policies, really, HR policies work towards getting people to think in one single direction.
Like whenever you talk about incentive with anybody, they always say that जितना they are supposed to do वही नहीं करते तो incentive की बात कहाँ से करेंगे?
That means,
How it comes up? They are getting salaries, so they are supposed to do something. They are not doing that. So how to talk about incentives? So
okay, yeah, that's only 5 minutes. Yeah, I think I have just a little more to go. I think he's got a relevant point, but the last statement that I made was you need to actually focus people. He's come into office, he's got 50 things to do, he does those 50 and goes away, and he says that, I've worked hard through the day. मैंने कोई 9 घंटे या 10 घंटे बैठ के अपना काम तो किया नहीं, आप ही का तो कर रहा था. So sometimes, yes, he knows he's getting paid a salary, but those 9 hours are dedicated to the company, but not to the effort that he's supposed to put in that part of the work. So in short, wanted to say that it's a two-way street. It's not something which is top down, or it's not something which is one way. And what do employees expect? That you build these policies which are generic, which is not specific to people from Punjab or locational or by level of people. Some of the times you have to ensure that there's something which the scope covers a very wide group of employees. Creates openness. So you understand, that this is the expectation, this is where I am, and how to get to the expectation is something that employees understand very clearly. Very important, it's to build trust, faith and commitment, either ways. Because if your policies are open and clear, I think it does create a lot of trust in an employee when he says that, okay, if I do this, I get rewarded like this, I'm going to have an appraisal, I'm going to be promoted if I do all these 5 things, so there's a promotion policy. There could be, career growth policies and so on. So it should be built to attract and retain talent. It should be built to involve, and that's the need of the day, and that's what my next slide is. We are going to be at a point where we're going to be employing more and more people who are below 25. And soon enough, the country is going to have a majority which is going to be below 25 years of age. So we cannot make policies because we've worked in the industry for 20 years and we have some experience. Yes, we have to put it to use, but without, if we do not take into account what the current generation's needs and requirements are, we're going to create another document which can be archived, and that 600-page document can sit on somebody's desk. So what do the Gen Z want? Transparency, fairness, and equal applicability. It has to be linked to reality. You cannot make a policy which is a very nice to have, utopian, but difficult to follow policy. What we were just discussing, understand how their contribution links to the result. So it is coming from the employee. When the industry says, हमारे पास तो incentive policy नहीं है क्योंकि नहीं होता है, आप ये मान के चलो that there are employees who say that, what am I doing? Why am I here? मैं ये काम अगर कर रहा हूँ तो वो next step उसका क्या है? उसके बाद आगे क्या है? And that's about the work they're doing today. So that they're able to understand what career growth options do they have. And I'm not talking about only, this includes workmen. You have very wise workmen today who are very, they know that, these are the things I've done. This is how I can improve. This is how I can be different. And this is how he can ensure his own perpetuity of employment. So building career growth paths and making them transparent through HR policies is very important. The other thing, which comes out, and I wish I had more time to discuss, was treat human as humans and not just resources. So, which means, let's not treat them other way around. Machines, money, men, This is a very different set of rules that apply to living organisms. So they say that there has to be policies which have to be have an emotional connect. and that it has to be a living document. You make one policy in year one, and I think you have to review it practically every quarter. Forget that. I think we've seen organizations which made HR or people policies and left them on the table and never reviewed them. Never went back to look, unless there was a stipulation from the labor law saying, this is what needs to be done and that's what needs to be done, and the leave and, something else. So it's just like we've made it once, undertaken a huge task, called a consultant like us, we've put it together and given them and said that this is what is working well. But, we've always told them that I think it has to be a living document, which means that if there are changes, you need to incorporate. Changes could be, with reference to your industry. Changes could be talent. Changes could be just about anything, the expectations of the new generation. And some thoughts that, the people that we spoke to expressed. One was follow the law, I think we're in a situation where most of us are looking at manufacturing and running shifts and looking at maybe employing people for many, many hours beyond the stipulated hours, many hours, difficult hours of work. People are swallowing that, but let's understand that they've all understood it very well. The day the chips are down, they're all going to stand up and say that, we will not do it. Or the day there is a talent, crunch, a huge talent crunch, people stand up and say that, I'm going to do my X hours a week and not beyond. Right now, I think we're living in a country where people don't mind doing that extra hour or extra few hours or standing in for overtime for somebody else because it translates to money. But soon enough, I think, when I say soon enough, I'm not talking about 2 or 5, maybe even 10 years down the line is soon enough, for which we have to start planning and changing our attitude. What else they look for is some of the softer needs and aspects, like the lady here talked about, time off requirements. There's some amount of flexibility. You swipe your card in, you swipe your card out. Yes, you've completed that. But very often, we have people working in and giving that going that extra mile, arm and leg, to actually help the company meet its targets. Next point is from the employees themselves, that keep it simple and sweet. Policies need to be short, policies need to be lucid, crisp, and easy to understand. The manager, this is from the other side of the table, doesn't want it to become a burden. He doesn't want to stand up ever so often, on an orientation day and have a 5-hour session non-stop on one policy after another. It should be something that people look at, understand. If there's ambiguity, only then there should be clarifications. People talked about work hard, play hard schemes, especially in setups which are away from the city, well understood by most of us. And one constant in this country is coming out to be better medical schemes for themselves and their families. And in our country where we have extended families, where we have parents who are dependent on us, I think that is something that has come out as an area that people want included in employee well-being. There's some policies which create positivity. I'll just quickly read out. If there's anything that anybody wants to know about them, then we can take them forth in, post the session. Employment break policy, skill upgradation policy, promotion of safety policy, best employee and recognition policies, paternity leave, referral policies, rehire, wedding gifts, birthdays, anniversaries. These are things which are pretty well known. Promotion, felicitation policy, farewell policies. We've seen organizations where people have worked for decades and they've resigned and they've just disappeared into the woodwork. Nobody said thanks to them. Nobody said, and he's a brand ambassador, If he goes out, he'll probably ask his children to come work for you. So these are some things, I guess, when we have time, we can go through it. And policies are created to work for the organization, This is my last slide. And it is your policies should create a good word of mouth, help you retain talent, reward talent, create a happy workplace, protects both sides from litigation. The pitfalls of bad drafted policy, court cases, mistrust, unionization, unsafe and dangerous work environments, loss of business, flexible room for discretion may become contractual obligations. You know, write a policy, somebody will say, you've written a policy, now this is my contractual right to ask you for that. So in conclusion, policies are not written in stone. You know, we have to have our eyes, and especially HR managers, you know, you need to know the pulse of the people to create HR policies. And once you've done that, wear the shoe and walk the mile. Then you will know where it pinches. Okay? And it's not a document which is them versus us. For people who are running businesses, senior management, please realize it's not there for creating a divide. And when you're making policies, I think it's best to research. When you're reviewing policies, it's best to research and find out what the global best practices are. I think this industry with 35 million people needs to create next practices, things that people in the other industries would like to follow. And graduate from being employer of choice to dream employer. And that's what your policies will do for you. They will work themselves for you. And one word of caution for HR managers, please, when people talk about policies or they have any confusions or ambiguities, don't throw the rule book at them, you know. Try to see if it's making sense, if it's relevant. If it's not relevant, immediately accept and say that we will make a change. And I think that's what is going to create a good HR policy. And I think I'm just going to conclude with these statements. And hopefully the perspective to creating employee documents, handbooks and rule books are going to change, and at least for people in this room when you go back. Thank you so much.